Go ahead, you're on.
Okay, so my presentation is on the impact of online instruction on the achievement gap. My specific focus was with Latino and white students in California. As far as, gosh, I'm sort of figured that one, slow response keyboard. So what I'm going to do is talk about where this study came from, the research question, talk a little bit about the literature, methodology findings, and then we'll have a discussion. I am not an instructor by training. I'm not a college professor by training. I'm a technology executive. I worked at Apple Computer for 5 years, and then I did startup companies after Apple. Five startup companies after I left Apple. And then I started teaching at the community college as an adjunct and became interested in teaching. I was having great fun teaching, so I tried to get a full-time job, which I got at Cabrillo College, and I've been teaching full-time now for 5 years. So I'm somebody who, like I say, is new to education, but spent a lot of time in technology, using technology to solve problems. That's the way I think of technology. Technology is a lever for human endeavor. And in the California Community College, because I was a technology person, I got interested in online instruction and discovered that overall our success rate for online students is about 5 percentage points lower than for face-to-face students. That's all online students versus all face-to-face students, regardless of who they are or what kind of class they took. And it's been steady at 5%. It started worse than that. And then it kind of gradually rose up to about a 5% differential in 2007. And it's just hung there since 2007. Every year we're about 5% lower success rate. That bothered me because I always thought that you use technology to make stuff better, not worse. And so I did a study. I did a study at Costanza College. Those of you who are familiar with the California Community College system may be scratching your head saying, where the hell is Costanza College? Well, the answer is it's nowhere because it's a fake name. And I'm not going to tell you where it was. And the reason it's Costanza is because it sounds like about 10 different community colleges, close enough. But it's a real college, and it's a real study of real data. It's a college that had a large Latino and white population, which was what I was interested in. I looked at the 12 courses that were offered at that college in both an online and a face-to-face format in each semester. So the student had to be presented with a choice of taking it online or face-to-face. Same class, and they chose to take either an online section or a face-to-face section. And what I discovered was a little stunning and startling to me, but I'll show you what I found in that initial study, and I'm going to spend just a second talking about the statistics here. I know that's probably not the greatest thing for 2 o'clock in an afternoon on a Friday at the end of a conference, but I just want to lay out a couple of things for you. The first is that the statistic that's being reported is the average grade of the students who took those classes. So you'll see for Latino students in face-to-face classes, in the aggregate of all Latino students in all of the face-to-face classes, the average grade was 2.0 in the face-to-face sections, and the average grade for Latino students was 1.52 in the online sections. So they're scoring about a half a grade point lower in the online section. And then you see that effect size out on the side, that 0.32, negative 0.32 out on the side. The effect size is the number of standard deviations that it is away. So the absolute difference is not quite as meaningful as the number of standard deviations statistically. So all of the effect sizes that I talk about from here on out are in terms of standard deviations. So this is about a third of a standard deviation lower for Latino students in online. For Latinas, it's over half a standard deviation lower in online classes. So that's the side-to-side difference, is the online versus face-to-face. And then you'll also see on the sort of the vertical direction of the graph, if you look down the face-to-face column, you'll see that the total Latino grade in face-to-face is 2.18, and the total white average grade in face-to-face 2.45. That is, white students earn an average grade higher than Latino students in face-to-face classes. We all know that. It's referred to as the achievement gap. This shouldn't be news, right? What's interesting about the impact of online classes is the impact that it has on the achievement gap. Because look at the white students side to side. Yes, they score lower in the online class, but there is no asterisk next to that. First off, the effect size is very small, less than 1/10 of a standard deviation. Not only that, it isn't even statistically significant, whereas the numbers in the upper section are statistically significant at pretty high levels on two of them, 0.001. So I kind of want you to be clear on the shape of this graph, because I'm going to show you some of these graphs just like this for different combinations of things. This is one study at one school with a very small, you can see the N, there were only 3,500 students included in this study. Certainly big enough to be significantly statistical, backwards, but not really representative of the state of California. This is just one school. Any questions on how this thing's laid out, the numbers? Okay. So I took this study around to the faculty at Costanza College. I said, look what's happening. You're doing online classes and you're exacerbating the achievement gap. You're not making things better for Latino students. You're making things worse for Latino students in online classes. Why do you think that is? Does anyone have an idea why that might be? Why would Latino students, why would it make the gap wider? Could be language. Could be some kind of deficiency in language with a student.
The access to the technology and being able to know how to use it effectively to teach it.
Yeah, Latino students might not have broadband connections or might not be as literate on the computer.
I have found that they often don't even have in their home, and I've learned not to ever assume that, but it was the first time, and it was with more Latinas than other students that they just, but then we do have them on the campus. And I told them there is on the campus, it's really not an excuse, but I understand. Or they're going to a public library, and it made a difference because sometimes those public libraries had firewalls. So I did learn to,
At my college, a lot of them want to take the classes together in groups. So if they can't get the class at the same time, they don't take it online.
People want to take it in groups, so they can't take it.
And the other, sign off of what she said, maybe they had it at the college, but if they had to get home right after school to babysit or whatever, they need it at home because that's where they can access it. That's at college, but it's not accessible because they can't be at the college if they have to get somebody back to school and be on
because
babysit.
that's
Or
the other thing.
transportation.
That's the other thing that I have learned too is they're often taking care of more of the children, and it's not always there. So I mean, within their family or the elderly, I had to take grandma to the hospital. There's a little bit more social things that I have learned. Not the only culture, but definitely something that.
Has anyone heard that they thought it would be easier? Mm-hmm. Did you ever hear that? I heard that. Let me show you the three things that I heard back from the Costanza faculty. The first was motivation. That is, they thought it's sort of characterized by they thought it would be easier. They found out it was hard. Kind of comment. The direct quote or the direct representative quote, willingness to show up online makes a big difference. I mean, the implication here is that the Latino students, they just don't show up online like the white students do. Right? Isn't that what they're saying, actually? Okay. The other thing I heard was the technology. Probably has to do with familiarity with the technology, with broadband connections, with computer literacy, and those kinds of things. And then the third category, I forget who mentioned it, was the language issue. Yes, thank you. The language issue. And especially as it relates to reading and writing in English as opposed to verbal English. Yeah.
I think it's social. I think, but that's in the traditional as well, as that. So we're a college that's been getting a lot, but hadn't had before, and finding that classes that do more traditional or online, and that's why I'm glad to hear all this suggestion on how to be more social online, is that there are certain cultures, not the only one, but that like, and you do need a more social, you need that other student for, and not just coming by themselves, and it is an issue.
Okay. Well, let me tell you what these three categories of responses have in common. They all have in common the fact that they can blame the problem on the students. And that lets us not take responsibility for what we do. Oh, well, if the students could just do this better, or if the students just had that. Well, we don't get to choose the students that we get. Our students come to us the way they are, and our job is to do the best job we can for them the way they are, not to bemoan the fact that they don't come to us better somehow. So I understand these statements because I have spoken each one of these myself. I don't mean this to be critical any more than it's being self-critical. I'm being critical of us as an institution, as a system. Okay. Well, this kind of bothered me, so I thought I'm going to go poke around and find out how much this is happening around in the world. My research question is, how does enrollment in online classes impact academic success for Latino community college students? I explicitly reject this deficit model. I explicitly, in my research question, say, I'm not coming at this from what is it about these students that's wrong. I'm coming at it saying, what is it about the way we deliver online education that's not working for these students? I believe that we should measure the equivalency of outcomes, not the equivalency of an online experience. That is, having virtual office hours, for example, so that we can say we have office hours that replicate our face-to-face office hours, is kind of a weird concept to a student who's online 24 hours a day with their smartphone. The idea that there's a window during which somebody's available, a time window, doesn't hang together for folks. And I look at the implementation of humanizing and relationship-based pedagogy. What you've been learning about in the sessions the last couple of days, really, about how important relational instruction is, how important instructor presence is, this idea that it needs to be, that it is a social activity that's connected to other people. And I think that's where the key is going to be going forward. If you look at the literature in this area, the sociocultural approach to education would say that we should study the cultural background of our students and that we should connect to that social background. One of the key aspects of Latino, by Latino I'm talking about Mexico, Central and South America, which is predominantly what our Hispanic population is in the community colleges in California. Even the word educación means something different in Mexico than it means here. We have a kind of what Paulo Freire would call a banking model of education. In a lot of our education, we pour content into students. We hope that they will function as empty vessels and fill up with this content and then regurgitate it to us in some way that we can give them a grade. And when in Mexico, if somebody is bien educado, it means more than just that they have been filled up with content. It characterizes an environment of mutually respectful relationships that have been developed. It's a way of behaving in the world that says that you bring value to the world just like everybody else, and the student brings value. So it's not just respect from the student to the professor, which is very much a part of that experience. It's also respect from the professor to the student. The student brings real life experience to the classroom, brings value and knowledge to the classroom, and it's that mutual respect of what we bring to the experience that creates education in that particular sociocultural environment. And the literature around that's pretty strong. That is the way that certainly in Mexico the way educación is considered. The second point is that Web 2.0 is perfectly capable of supporting that kind of mutually respectful environment. That is, you can have interaction and social contact in Web 2.0. We spent a couple days talking about how to do that. The third is this idea of equivalence. if you read the accreditation documents, and if you read how to get a course through a curriculum committee, what you have to do is create a class that is the equivalent of the face-to-face class. That's the way everything is written. It has to be the equivalent of the face-to-face class. Well, there's stuff that you can do online that you can't do in a face-to-face class. And there's stuff you can do in a face-to-face class that you can't do in an online class. So why are we insisting that they be equivalent in their elements, which is how it gets interpreted?
Equitable, you're right, they need to change versus they need to.
It's the equivalent of the outcome. It's the equivalent of the outcome that we want, right? We want them to have the same outcome. How they get to it, who cares? Let's decide what outcomes we want, and then let's get the student to that outcome in the most appropriate way for the way that we're delivering, I'm using that word, delivering our courses. So anyway, equivalence bugs me because it often gets interpreted as meaning, well, we have to have the same elements in both sides. So let's make sure we talk about equivalence in terms of outcomes. The other thing you find in the literature is that online classes, this debate is over. This debate is over. Are online classes better or worse than face-to-face classes? Yes. Yes, they are better and worse. That's my favorite quote in all the literature from Zhao. He says, online classes are as good or as bad as face-to-face classes. This debate's over. Nobody argues about it anymore, or they shouldn't be. And if they are arguing, you can look at tons of studies. The latest ones, the CCRC, this is Columbia's Community Research Center, Columbia University. This one just came out in the fall of last year. They looked at 24,000 students in the Virginia Community College system. They found a lower completion rate for online classes. They didn't find any difference on retention in that particular study, and there was no breakout by ethnicity. And then they went and did another study in Washington State. The first one was Jaggers and Zhu. The second one is Zhu and Jaggers. I'm guessing they're working together. And what they discovered was that underprepared students didn't do as well online. And again, no breakout by ethnicity. So, but basically, the classes, there's nothing in here that says online classes are worse or better. So my methodology was to use mixed methods. I looked at 4.5 million student records of the grade that was earned in a class. The class was offered in the same semester on the same campus in both formats. So if Orange Coast College didn't offer the class that semester in both formats, it wasn't included in my data. But if you did offer it in any California community college between May of 2005 and July of 2009, if the class was offered face-to-face and online on your campus during the same semester, I got that record. I got that data. Yeah.
At the same time of day?
Well, no. No.
I think that would be significant.
Well, for the online classes, it's kind of sketchy because what time of day does the online class happen? The day-to-day classes, there is data in the database that you could look at night classes versus day classes, for example, or you could look at Friday classes versus. That wasn't the focus of my study, though, was to compare online versus face-to-face in the aggregate. So I didn't really break it out that way. The dimensions that I looked at in the student record, the database has all kinds of information about students, but the ones that I looked at were ethnicity, gender, and their stated goal, what they came to college for. And then on the courses, because we use top codes in California, we have all kinds of attributes of every course, whether it's a transfer class or a vocational class, etc. The ones that I looked at were whether it was transfer or not, transfer, vocational, or basic skills. I looked at those three categories of classes. And then the qualitative research I did, I found 10 Latino students who were enrolled at Costanza College in online classes last fall. And I got them before, yes?
The course attributes, what do you mean by transfer?
In the California Community College system, we have some classes which are that count as transfer credit to the UC or the CSU. and some classes that don't. Yeah. And then the qualitative, again, 10 Latino students. I got them before the class started, and interviewed them before the class started, halfway through, and then at the end about their experience of the class.
Were these a random selection of online students?
The qualitative was not. The qualitative was by invitation. I invited about 1,000 students. I didn't know if they were Latino or not. So I invited about 1,000 students. My invitation began with the words, "If you're not a Latino student, I'm sorry for wasting your time. But if you are, I'd be interested in talking to you." And then I just described my study, and so they're self-selected. Not to wait till the end of the presentation, here's what I found, and then I'll give you the details. The first thing I found was that there's an online penalty, like we saw in the first slide. That is, if you take an online class in the state of California in the community college system, in the aggregate, you will pay a price for taking that class. Doesn't matter whether you're white or Latino or male or female, for the most part. I'll show you some exceptions, but for the most part, you'll pay a price for that. It might not be a big price, might be a very small price, but there is so I call this the online penalty. Okay? And it varies depending on whether you're Latino or white or male or female or transfer student or a basic skills student. It varies, but there's almost always a penalty. The second point, because that online penalty is more severe for Latino students than for white students, for the most part, it aggravates, it exacerbates, it widens the achievement gap. That's the second point. The third thing I learned is there's no evidence of deficiencies amongst the Latino students. There's no evidence of that. None. None. They enrolled in, remember I took students who chose to enroll in an online class when presented with the choice of taking an online class versus a face-to-face class. They're not stupid. They know that if they don't have a computer at home, they probably shouldn't be in that class, for the most part. So overwhelmingly, the students were technically literate, English language literate. These deficiencies that I have used myself to explain this shortfall weren't present in this study. And the last piece, that the students overwhelmingly validated this concept of educación, this idea that it's based on a mutually respectful relationship between instructor and student. So that was good for me to hear because I am not a Latino, if you haven't figured that out by looking at me. And so what I knew about the Latino concept of educación was what I had studied academically in the literature. So it was, for me, it was good to hear that actually made sense. The final point, those kinds of relationships, those mutually respectful relationships, were overwhelmingly absent in these students' experience of their online class. So here we go. Yeah, yes?
What is the definition of educación?
I didn't use the word educación in my interview.
So I'm asking you.
Yeah.
What do you think is their interpretation or the types of behaviors that indicate to them that it is a mutually respectful relationship? What was it saying?
Could I ask you to hold that for a second because I have some quotes coming up that might illustrate that. So remind me if I don't hit it, but I'm going to hit it. And it's better to use their voices than mine. So here's the numbers. Yeah, bunch of numbers. This is the same two columns, face-to-face and online. Average grade earned by the students. You'll see the end. The sample size is next to each goal. And this is just a list of the goals. These are the standard goals that we collect when a student enrolls at the community college. We ask them what your goal is, and they say, well, I want to acquire job skills, or I want to update my job skills, or I want to transfer to a four-year, whatever. These are the standard ones. Those of you who are familiar with the data, this is what we collect when they register. And then, so 104, out of my 4.5 million records, 144,000 of them were enrolled to acquire job skills. And for those folks, they did better in the online class. You see, 2.16 grade versus a 2.08. Was it a lot better? Nah, not much. Half of a 5/100th of a standard deviation. Not much, but better, statistically better. And then as you work through them, I've ranked them by the effect size. So the ones that are better for online students are at the top, and the ones that are worse for online students are at the bottom. You'll see those with the goal of high school diploma or GED had the worse, bigger gap between face-to-face and online. Kind of mull over that for a minute there, pick out your favorite goal and see what the effect is. But what this really says is that what Zhao said was right. There's no big difference between outcome between a face-to-face and an online class. You could argue, but the range is not. They're all kind of equivalent, wouldn't you say? Some worse than others. The problem with aggregated data is that it hides the reality. Let's take an example. Look here. Let me go back to that last one here. Let's take update job skills. See the third one down? Essentially the same outcome. A 2.3 average grade in a face-to-face class, a 2.33 average grade in the online class. That's a difference of 2/100ths of a standard deviation. It is statistically significant, barely, but not meaningful in any way, right? Same outcome in either class. Now, because the enrollment is skewed in the online class and the face-to-face class, this is hiding something that's going on under the covers. In face-to-face classes, in this database of these 4.5 million students, or actually of the 100 and however many thousand that had the goal of updating job skills, 140,000 or something, right? Of those 140,000, in the face-to-face classes, over a third of those students were Latino students, okay? In the online classes, less than a quarter of the students were Latino students. So when you look at the face-to-face score, there are more Latino students influencing the average grade in the face-to-face score than there are Latino students influencing the proportionally in the online score. You see that? If you disaggregate the data, something startling happens. White males do better. Where have we heard that before? I mean, with the whole concept of white privilege and the internet being essentially a white male domain.
Did you know that a major study was just in the LA Times probably yesterday or the day, just within 2 to 3 days? I haven't looked it up. I just wrote it down. I have a Kindle, so I didn't print it or get it yet. But that says that the major study of, I think it was in that or the Chronicle, might be in the Chronicle of Higher Ed. That might be what it said. I'm sorry, but that they've already said it, but they've done another brand new study just recently of men of color, Latino, African American, that we're not doing well enough in education. There is a gap, and we know it, but it is a brand new one, just been within the last, very recent.
Well,
again,
stick with me because it gets interesting. Look at the Latinos. They do fine in the online class. They do exactly the same. Latinos who took a class where they had a choice at their college during that semester, all those caveats I gave you at the middle, Latino, male, did just as well in the online class as they did in the face-to-face class. But the Latinas got hammered. And the fact that they didn't do as well by such a relative, this is a fairly significant, this is over 1/10 of a standard deviation. This starts to be, this is enough to notice. I sort of set a threshold at 1/10, especially with something like an average grade where it's got such a strong impact on the future of that student. I mean, this is the basis of everything that student's going to do for the rest of their life, whether they're going to transfer, whether they're going to graduate. So I'm a little tighter on my criteria, but a tenth of a standard deviation is enough to start paying attention to, I think. And that brings the total, both gender Latino number down by almost a tenth of a standard deviation. It exacerbates the achievement gap. If you look at the very bottom line there, the achievement gap goes from 0.24 standard deviations to 0.34 standard deviations, or a 41% increase in the achievement gap. In this exact combination of students with that goal. So this is an important finding. The aggregated data hides what's actually going on. And it's actually possible to have a situation where white students do worse and Latino students do worse, but because of the mix in the classes, they look like the classes are equivalent. Like this one. It looks like it's equivalent. Okay. Let's look at some other stuff. Hello. So overall, all 4.5 million students, this is what I found. It pretty much replicates the experience of Costanza, not as dramatic, but essentially replicates it. For Latino students, about a tenth of a standard deviation. For Latinas, 1600ths. White males, 0.07. White female, 0.10. Overall exacerbation of the achievement gap, 44%. Across 4.5 million students. Yes?
In the previous subgroup, you had white males doing significantly better in the online compared to the traditional within their own group.
Yes.
Why do we get this reversal here?
In the previous slide, I was only talking about, come on, back button.
Job skills, right?
Yeah, it was only students, this is only students whose goal is to update their job skills.
And you might be
So this is 67,000 students who stated that their goal was to update job skills. Now what I'm saying is, okay, for all 4.5 million of every goal, let's break it out by ethnicity and gender. So this is the aggregated number. Now, if I start looking at their different goals, and there's a key grouping between vocational and transfer. So I thought it'd be interesting to look at vocational versus transfer students. What I noticed was, for vocational students, as long as they're male, things seem pretty rosy. Is that a fair summary of this slide? Vocational male students, very little difference in the outcome, face-to-face or online. Female, if you're white, very little difference, really, 0.03. But if you're a Latina, not so good. And if we look at the transfer students, it really is bad news for everybody in the transfer realm, isn't it? If you look at the transfer students, white males are over a tenth of a standard deviation online penalty, right? The other thing I looked at was underprepared students. They get slammed in every category of every ethnicity and every gender. Not a good idea for an underprepared student to take an online class.
What were the characteristics that you considered to make a student underprepared?
Their goal, yeah. So in this case, it is actually, because they come in with a goal of a GED or a goal of a high school diploma. So there's a presumption of, the underprepared is my language, but what it really means is that their goal was a GED or a high school diploma. And it was self-identified when they registered. Why are you here? I'm trying to get my high school diploma.
And this is where you have the greatest gap, isn't it, overall?
Actually, transfer was the greatest. Transfer was the greatest gap. This is the largest exacerbation of the achievement gap, but let me go a little further because it gets a little tricky to dig into the numbers here. One of the things that we know is that sometimes students take classes that aren't aligned with their goal. They came in and they had a transfer goal, but they took some goofy class, or they came in with a vocational goal, but they accidentally enrolled in a, calculus class or something. And in fact, about 14% of transfer students are enrolled in non-transfer classes. Vocational students, about 63% are not in vocational classes. And for underprepared students, 96% of them are not in basic skills classes. Many underprepared students come to the community college and enroll in classes without guidance and find themselves in over their heads, right? And so I thought it would be interesting to look at only those students who are in classes that are aligned with their goal, right? If you're a transfer student, I don't care how you did in your non-transfer classes. Let's look at the ones that were aligned with your goal. Here's what it looked like for transfer students in transfer classes. Again, Latino with the largest online penalty, followed by white female, followed by Latino, followed by white male. This didn't change that much. If I look at vocational students in vocational classes, this is pretty close to what we saw before for vocational. A large online penalty for Latinas, Latino, and white male, pretty much no difference. And if I look at underprepared students in basic skills classes, look at that. There's no difference. There's no difference of any kind. There's no achievement gap difference. There's no ethnicity difference. There's no online versus face-to-face difference. There's no statistical difference between the outcome of a underprepared student when they're in a basic skills class. To me, this is fascinating. I have no idea why this happened. Yeah.
Did you look at any aspects of the learning community?
No, I didn't look at anything.
Yeah,
I think there's a wealth of interesting research to be done around this slide, but I can't explain it. I mean, one explanation I've heard is, well, look how bad it is for everybody. I mean, it's just bad, and it's so bad that because these grades are really low, right? But I don't pretend to know the answer to this. The N is relatively small, but it's still 4,700 records. I mean, that's you can run statistics on 4,700 records and get real numbers out of it. So I don't think it's a statistical thing. I think there's something that's actually going on here. I just don't know what it is. So I thought that was interesting. Another key finding from the qualitative research: these students are capable with the technology. They email on his phone, they play PlayStation, they've been on the computer since elementary school. Remember, they chose an online class when they had the choice between an online class and a face-to-face class. I'm not talking about somebody who got jammed into an online class because it was their only option to get some class that they needed, where they were, somehow tricked into it or something. They chose the online class, and they know about what their abilities are. So the technical competency, at least in this case, was high. The other thing was they're extraordinarily realistic about how the class is going to be. I believe the material is equally hard in the online class. It's harder in the sense you have to be on top of yourself. So they were very realistic about that it wasn't going to be. I hope your computer's all right.
Well, he's 15 years old, so I hope it's not.
Oh, there you go. Well, bring it over here and I'll jump on it. I dropped it, honest. Okay. So very realistic about their expectations of the online class. One of the questions I asked students was, think of a class that you've had in the past that was really, really a good class. And then I give them a minute. I said, no, just think about it. Get one in mind. Get one clearly in mind. It was just a really good class. And then tell me about that class. And then I asked them, now think about the worst class you ever had. Tell me about that class. These are the response. When they talk about their bad class that they had before, here's what they thought. Remember, this isn't online or face-to-face. I'm just asking them to remember a bad class from their past. Here's what they said. The teacher didn't like answering questions. You'd ask a question, she'd talk to you like an idiot. There's no relationship between the teachers and the students. He's trying to give us information, not teaching it. There's a difference. There really is. Do these sound like people with problems with the English language? Why do I need to think like him to know the answers? I shouldn't have to think like him to answer the correct answer. I should have to think about what the information that I know, not what tricks he's going to use in the question. So, bad classes characterized by bad relationships. Prior good classes, again, not online or face-to-face, just tell me about a good class you had in the past, I felt like he was someone I could open up to without being judged. He didn't single you out. I literally got 100% and turned in all my homework in that class. I enjoyed the conversation. He'd ask us stuff. He asked us to participate. I think this is interesting. He asked us to participate. He asked us what we thought. And then he makes a distinction. I've had teachers, if they thought you weren't paying attention, would ask you what you thought, right? This guy didn't come across that way. He wasn't like that, right? So that idea that when you ask somebody what they think about something in class, if it's punitive, if you're asking them that because you think they're not paying attention, that's not respectful, right? But if you ask because you genuinely want to know what they think, now you're engaging the student. Remember, this isn't online or face-to-face. This is just what was a good class for you. This was a good class where it was different, where they felt like you really did want to know what you thought. And then in the online classes, oh my God, I feel like I don't get to know the instructor as well. Submit things that was never enough. You try to communicate, get small responses back. I think if there was going to be a person setting it up, I think they should have a connection with their students. And my favorite is this one here. I never met the guy. Ask him about his online instructor. I don't know. I never met the guy. I don't know if he's a good teacher or not. This is at the end of the course. I don't know if he's a good teacher. I never met him. Sad, really. The other thing I found was that it is possible for there to be a good student-instructor relationship in an online class in two situations. One, if they have a prior relationship with an online instructor. That seemed to work. And the second was that their expectations aren't very high. So here's a student who, knew the instructor from before, missed a deadline, sent an email, said, hey, I'm sorry I missed the deadline, something happened. The instructor said, no problem, turn it in, was flexible. But it was based on a relationship that the student felt like they could have that conversation with the instructor. And then the second one was basically saying, we email back and forth just when we need to. I think she's been sick for a while, but it's not bad, from an online instructor. So what they're doing is they're saying, I know it's an online class. I'm not expecting much from my online instructor. And when I got a reply to the email, I was, exhilarated by that. Okay, the limitations of this particular study, I focused on gender, goal, and Latino and white students only. So I can't tell you about African American students. Well, I can, but not in this study. I have the data for that, and that's kind of the next phase. But it is likely, in fact, it's true that other ethnicities will have different findings. Also, there's no valid measure in the data of SES, of socioeconomic status. People want to argue about whether it's race, class, or gender, and class is a big part of things. There's no data available that's reliable for socioeconomic status in the community college database. You can use a BOG waiver, the Board of Governor waiver, that should give you low income, but so few of our BOG qualified students actually apply for a BOG waiver that we're missing a huge proportion.
I was going to say that they are coming out more with the equity, again, for outcomes and stuff, of it being a socioeconomic as compared to ethnicity.
Yeah, we don't want to talk about race.
I know.
I know. People don't want to talk about race. It's an uncomfortable conversation for a lot of people on all sides of the conversation. So we always try and make it be about something else. But it's still there. It's still there, and it's very real. And we probably ought to be talking about it more rather than less.
And what about equity? It should have been true also, it matters probably the race and some of those of the instructor if they know that. And they have some effect, and even though we're supposed to be the same old teachers, we know that that's just not true.
We do.
We know that.
We do.
But even the state meaning of equity is changing slightly, because I went to the academic senate for California and on that, and they said that, towards more the socio that will have edges, like you say, is there ethnic as a part of that, but kind of moving a little bit of what that word even means when you say there's an equity study to it being somewhat socioeconomic.
There's no question that there is a socioeconomic aspect of the issue, but there is also a racial and ethnic aspect to the issue, and both of those are at play here, I think. The second problem with the study is we're using grade. We're using the grade in the class as the outcome measure, and that's a little tricky because we all know about grades, right? On the other hand, when you use 4.5 million of them, the variability kind of gets mooshed out of it, and you can kind of say, yeah, but there's enough of them here that it...
And they've got to start doing, and I'm speaking as a slope, the equity of outcomes.
That's right.
If they're moving, and they're going to have to, in the next accreditation and whatever, start looking at, as you do your SLO and as you assess your SLO, is there an equitable lens to it?
Yep.
As they say, and it is going to come out and be looked at and right, and your study is very interesting for some of that.
But I think, too, there's another problem with, because of the lack of equity in preparation that's reflected in some of the classes, there are people that have positive outcomes that may not have a positive grade. Right. And they will say, I learned a lot in this class, but because of some other issues, I wasn't able to convey it in the format that got picked up as, hey, I'm a success.
Right.
And they can see that, but I think a lot of the data isn't looking at that.
Yeah, I agree.
My third point, I have no data about the quality of the instructor. And every study that's ever been done on education that tries to do factor analysis on what determines the outcome for a student, in every study that's ever been done, it's the quality of the instructor that's the number one determinant of student outcome. Overwhelmingly, teachers don't want to talk about it because, you know, we get evaluated. Somebody might evaluate us on our quality of instruction. We can't have that. But overwhelmingly, that's the number one determinant. And it is possible to do a factor analysis of this to look at instructor factors. I'd like to do that study too. But I don't have any information about that in this study. And then the last one, this is a relatively small self-selected sample. On the interviews, I did only talk with 10 students, and they were self-selected. So I want to give you the caveat that that probably is not as generalizable as the quantitative part of the study.
And their ability to sustain through the course might have, the fact that they would allow themselves to self-select into something like that, might actually put them in the higher...
Only 6 of them made it to the end of the class. Of the 10, only 6 made it to the end.
But even at 6,
yeah,
the fact that they made it through the end of the course makes them different, for sure.
Yeah. So I thought I'd try and come up with one graphic that summarizes the quantitative findings. I don't know if this one does it. It's the best I've been able to come up with so far. These are the outcome differences, the size of the online penalty. Ethnicity is across the front there, so ethnicity and gender, so it goes white male, Latino, white female, and Latina in order of magnitude, and then vocational in the blue bars and transfer in the red bars, and I don't know, not a bad summary of the quantitative data overall.
What is amazing is that you keep coming up with a female, and yet what the national study has been definitely centered more on male.
Yeah, and if you wanted to look at this from a feminist lens, it would be a very different study. I looked at it from an ethnic lens on the Latino white perspective. You could look at this from a feminist lens. You could look at this from critical race theory. I mean, there's a lot of interesting things you could do with this data. I just happened to choose this particular slice.
Well, I think that's consistent with a little bit I know about the differences in how the Latino culture values education for males and females. And that males, it's more traditional that they spend more time in school and more focus on that for them than females who are caretakers. And
I wish I had spent more time looking at the gender aspects of Latino culture. I didn't spend much time with it. I read a couple of pieces talking about in California criminalization as the key aspect of the Latino experience, and family rearing. Basically staying at home and taking care of family as the key aspect for the Latina side, but I don't know if that's generalizable or not.
It's getting lost. So there's somebody behind you.
Yeah.
You know, I'm looking at that, and the Latina being very unique in this wide disparity. And I'm wondering, when you looked at the language of education, whether or not that has actually a different meaning for a female. And we're looking at also in a time frame here.
Yeah.
This is as we are now, where we have come from. It may not be where we're all going to be culturally.
Yeah, maybe not.
As culture evolves and changes. But Latino women perhaps experiencing more demand in terms of change when they enter these educational environments, not feeling the communal support that maybe they're so accustomed to for all that reinforcement for where they've come from. And wondering if then the meaning of education means is actually different for them than it is for the Latino.
Could be.
I think this is major. Great.
Yeah.
There's a comment in the chat. It says, is there a standard training or set of guidelines in the state as far as how an online instructor should interact with students?
How an online instructor should interact.
From Richard.
Well,
There are guidelines. There are all kinds of guidelines about regular student interaction and sort of the frequency of it. I think this question is going more to the character of the interaction. That is it are you allowed to be disrespectful to a student, for example, or I'm not sure exactly where the question is coming from, but there's no regulation of the nature, the character of the interaction that I'm aware of.
Certain office hours, so there is
rules about availability. There are a lot of rules about availability and accessibility of the instructor, but not about the nature of the conversation.
But I am somewhat wondering if because of the national studies have been on and so come down on maybe males, if maybe we are mixing somewhat of the Latino male with African American male and getting caught, because that very clearly is that the male in the African American has said that we're not doing well enough and they're behind. If that's if that's getting moved into that, and we haven't been focusing on the gender. Because this is so
the data, as soon as you start looking at African American, Asia Pacific, male and female, there are role reversals. There are things that change fairly dramatically, but I haven't looked at it enough to be firm about it. But there's definitely, for example, Asia Pacific, Asian females fall. And Asian males
they need to
don't.
break them and not try and lump them is what I guess I'm trying.
There may be a bigger gender effect than ethnicity effect. I just don't know.
The question that you answered, he added to it. He said, "I mean, how often the instructor should interact."
They did have
during the weekly session.
Curriculum.
Right.
The curriculum committee dictates that.
Regular.
Outline of record. Yeah, someone has to sign off on a new online or a change to online, and then we have to send a substantive, we have to send a certain amount when a class gets to a certain point. You have to file substantial change, and so they're really looking at that there really appropriate.
Yeah, so the answer is it all has to go through a curriculum committee, and the curriculum committee is going to enforce some level of interchange, and I'm just not sure on exactly what that level is.
But I think, go ahead.
Yeah.
I just wanted to, is your question related to that? We're going to switch gears.
Well, effective contact, I think, too, that I think we also have to remember that contact and communication is a bi-directional process. It's not just teachers figuring out how to communicate with students. It's also students having the tools and some kind of motivation to want to connect back. I can see where, and this has been my pet peeve for years, nowhere in our system do we train students how to use these tools effectively to communicate back so that they are not feeling disconnected.
Yeah.
A lot of the things that we're learning here that have these wonderful classes, like use Blackboard. Where's the student class for Blackboard?
Yeah.
Okay? We need to practice on how to use Blackboard, but where's the student piece? For blogging and all that. We just assume that people are doing that. And I think for this irregular contact to be effective, because socialization is a bi-directional process, we need to start looking at how can we help some of these people who are not used to it, may not have access to that, also get the tools to communicate, the voice to communicate in. They may have a voice, but they don't have the means to do it.
You want to switch gears?
Yeah, if that's okay. I want to go back to
Briefly, because of the
a quick feature study that you may need to do on strategic enrollment management that shows that a lot of students drop out after they're enrolled in classes because of not having that cultural sense of community on a community college campus because they're commuter students. Or not part of the emotions of Quincy, or not feeling part of it into the Latino females.
The bridge classes, the freshman experience, the STARS classes.
Well, or the Latino students may not have found a Quincy group where they feel comfortable sharing and communicating, and that, therefore they may not feel comfortable communicating online.
Yeah.
Good point.
That's in my study.
Nature, yes.
Let me slip through briefly and wrap this up. So there was no evidence, this is on the qualitative side, no evidence of student deficits. They did validate the importance of the mutually respectful relationship, and those relationships were absent in their online classes. So my recommendations, and then we can talk as long as you want. My recommendations, I think we need to reframe these program evaluations around equity. I just think we've left equity out. Equity across gender, equity across ethnicity, equity across SES.
So they are.
I think we need to reframe this.
Yeah, it's the slope. They are. They are calling it equity lens, and they are going to in the next year.
And I think the key to doing that is to not say, what is it about these students that make them fail? Because as soon as you do that, you missed it. The question has to be, what is it about the way that we're providing this education that isn't working for these students? That's the equity question.
But they are in studies coming down. They're asking in distance ed as well as everything. They're coming down with that in the slope, in the student outcomes. They're coming down with the enrollment, retention. They are looking at all those areas.
And I understand that we're starting to measure it.
Right.
And as soon as we start to measure it, we're going to come up with all the things that are wrong with those students.
Yeah.
And what I'm saying is, before that train leaves the station, let's get it on a different track.
But by putting it to the outcomes, they are beginning.
You're starting. You got to measure it first.
Because that is the teacher, at least measuring those outcomes, and then another part of that, measuring that we've been talking about, is what you're teaching, what your students are learning, and if not, where's the gap?
Yep.
So there is something going on in the state. There used to be lax about if you didn't annually do a student equity plan. You just did your demographic data.
Yeah.
They're required. They're going to be coming down in the next year or so. They say the state is now going to say if you don't have a current student equity plan, you need to develop one because I'm in the process of developing one.
I think all of that is great. It's great steps in the right direction.
Yeah, there's something coming down, so maybe they've listened to you better.
Let me wrap up. Equivalence. I think equivalence needs to be about the outcomes, not the elements of a program. I think that online instructor quality needs improvement. Just needs improvement. And it's not the people who are at all these conferences. It's not the people who come to this conference to learn about how to be more effective as online instructors. It's the thousands of online instructors who don't come to these. That's where the problem is. It's not the people in the room.
The problem, I think, starts with the administration from the top down and how they set the tone and what they're willing to pay for.
Yeah.
That's where the problem. Leadership, probably, I believe in Deming's philosophy, to build our problems are caused by leadership and management policies. And you have people that want to come, and your administration says, well, we're not going to pay for this.
It's my first Deming fan in a community college audience. Normally he's kind of a business guy.
I came from business. I didn't come up through the system. Yeah. But I think that the leadership has to play the job of setting the tone and what they're willing to support. And a good deal of this, I think, are leadership issues first, and the lack of clear-cut goals of what to do and how it's all framed.
I want to give you my last recommendation so we can let the online folks go. And then, so my last recommendation is I think online classes should be part of an integrated program. That is, that they need to belong somewhere. At most colleges, online classes are under the purview of the content area. So the English department is responsible for the English online classes, and the math department is responsible for the math online. And there may be a coordinator, but the coordinator isn't in the line of the sort of the management of those folks. And I think that means that we get spotty implementations across the college, as opposed to having an integrated program where online classes are all of a part. That's the way the for-profits do it, and they're quite effective. Phoenix and people like that. You can argue about whether they're legit or not, but they're awfully good at delivering online courses. So that's the end of the formal presentation part of things. I'd love to talk for another day.